This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice.
Serious danger to Australia.
Hello everybody, it's me, Tom Ballard, here again with more bonus content for you. I love making content, and I love the Greens. These extra episodes are us meeting Greens candidates in targeted seats across the country for this election. Hope you've been enjoying them thus far. We've got another great one for you this week. Quick note, if you like Serious Danger, why not like and subscribe to us on YouTube? We have a YouTube channel, Serious Danger AU. Just have a search there. We put full videos on there. If you're watching this on YouTube right now, please like and subscribe. We'd love to build up the subscribers and create a YouTube empire like Friendly Geordies. Joining me for this ep is the Greens candidate for the Melbourne seat of Wills, Sarah Jefford. Hey, Sarah.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me today. It's exciting.
Oh, so exciting to talk to you. Congratulations on being a Greens candidate in
Thank
Wills,
you.
the dream.
I find myself in this position somewhat surprisingly, but here we are.
It is crazy. I want to ask you about that in a sec. But just before we go on, for folks who don't know, where is Wills? What seat are we talking about here? What kind of suburbs? Give us the lowdown on Wills.
Yeah, so it's like the best suburbs in Melbourne, really. So it's like Brunswick, Coburg, Fawkner, Glenroy, Pascoval. I live in Pascoval. And actually, if you draw a line right through the middle of the electorate from both ends, from all ends, you come basically to my house. Don't do that because then you would know where I live. That's where I am. So we're like next door to Cooper, which is our Greens candidate is Celeste Little, and we're north of Adam Bant territory down in the Melbourne electorate. So yeah, all the best bits of Melbourne.
The Green Empire is spreading and making inroads in Wills, which is great. Does it have? Is Bell Street in this as well? And what's it called? Yes. The what curtain? What's that called?
It's probably like the Green Curtain. They used to say Bell Street was like the Green Curtain. It's not really anymore. It's further north, I reckon. We just keep growing. We're the whole – look, I go down to Brunswick and people call it Greens Heartland, but I live in Pascoval and spend a lot of time in Coburg, and it's everywhere is greening up, to be honest.
Sure. I assume a big part of that is as property prices just constantly push people out further and further out of the city, you'll have more younger and progressive people living in the inner north suburbs because it's literally the only place they can afford not only to buy. I mean, the inner north now is actually too expensive for most people to buy, but to rent as well. Like that's seriously where you actually get some livable rent prices that you can deal with.
Yeah, and it's a pretty amazing place to live, but we know about a third of people are renters. So, yeah, and my partner and I bought in Pascoval, but we did have to deal with the Bell Street curtain that we were sort of pushing it up to be able to afford south of Bell Street, and we didn't make it. So we are north of Bell Street. We are knobs north of Bell. Yeah.
I love Melbourne's little nicknames for all over. So Wills was Bob Hawke's old seat. It is, a very, very a seat with a very long and strong Labor pedigree. It's currently held by Labor MP Peter Khalil on 4.18%. Greens' primary vote was 30% in 2016, took a bit of a hit in 2019, down to 26.6%. Brunswick is in it, as you mentioned. Did you see Tim Wilson's tweet about Brunswick values the other day? Did you see this shit?
Yeah, I don't know what that's about. I mean, honestly, Brunswick values are... Everybody values. We are full of creative, amazing people in Brunswick. We love it. Yes. I don't know. What's his problem with Brunswick?
Well, he's losing his mind. He's down in Bayside. He's losing his mind because Zoe Daniel, the independent, poses a threat to him, and he deserves his seat. He's a Liberal Party member and he worked at the IPA. He deserves this.
Yeah.
He said, outsiders keep piling into Goldstein to try and change our community. While they're bringing their Brunswick values to change Bayside, we are taking Bayside's values to shape the nation. It's like funny. It's also a little bit gross. You hear it a lot in America, like New York values, and what they really mean is like Jewish gay values or whatever. It's like it's being particularly gross and
it is gross
and conservative without saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, and we know that the electorate of Wills is probably one of the most diverse in the whole of Australia. So if you're having a go at Brunswick or Wills, you're basically just letting us know that you're not a very nice person. We didn't want him here anyway, so.
Yes, I would love to see Tim Wilson hanging out in Brunswick.
Hanging out in Brunny. No, that's not going to happen.
What are the big issues for this part of the world? What are people telling you about? What are the big things that stand out for the people of Wills when it comes to this election and the state of the country?
Yeah, it would be no surprise to anybody that's climate. We have like stalls and door knocking happening in the electorate, and everyone wants to talk to us about climate. Everybody's pretty upset with the Liberal Party and the government and want to kick them out. And look, for us, it's also things like housing affordability, cost of living, childcare availability, but also cost, particularly with the pandemic, for example, when we had a little bit of time when childcare was free. And we're hearing a lot of positive response to the Greens policy on free dental or dental into Medicare. So, yeah, it's all of those things, but climate is the number one that keeps coming up all the time. Yeah.
Of course. Better elect a Green then if you want some action on climate change, I say.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's why I'm here, really. And I mean, that is why I'm here. I think that's a lot of reasons why candidates are standing up, but I could have done other things. And it really got to the point where there was no other option but to stand up because, you know, we don't have any other options anymore. It's Greens in Parliament, it's climate emergency or wait for us to combust, really. Yeah.
God. Well, tell me more about that. You are a surrogacy lawyer. You've worked in family law. You worked for the Aboriginal Legal Service for a while, but, you know, surrogacy law is really your focus at the moment. You're someone who was a surrogate for a couple yourself. You've had that personal experience. You've written books about this. This is a part of your practice. That's a big part of your life. But, yeah, how do you go to that to joining and standing as a candidate for the Greens?
Yeah, so the Greens was a long time before I became a surrogacy lawyer.
Right.
And I think actually I have talked about this a bit, so it's okay to put it out there, but I used to live with somebody who was heavily involved in the Liberal Party, and people are always a bit surprised by that, but we are still good mates. But we were living together at university, and so he had some John Howard placards around the house, and we... And I was studying human rights law, and there was an election on. It was the 2004 election. And so I was sort of learning about human rights law and looking at party policies and being a bit confused about how these parties could say that they were standing up for refugees when they weren't even meeting our refugee obligations under human rights law. And that's actually how I found the Greens. I read Bob Brown's memoir. I went, oh, this guy makes sense. So I then moved to Melbourne and I started working at Legal Aid and bought a Greens membership with my first paycheck. So that was 17 years ago.
Yeah, wow.
And I've been active on and off over the last 17 years, but it's always been social justice was the reason I came to the Greens. And very much these days it's, you know, recognising that social justice and human rights and environmental justice and First Nations justice and climate justice, they're all part of one and the same, really. So, yeah, that's kind of how I came to the Greens, I guess, was initially I wanted to be a human rights lawyer and Greens policy aligned with that. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And now, as you say, you know, climate is fueling everything. Obviously, it is a number one priority. It's bringing you to the party. You were involved in a climate forum recently with a bunch of the candidates for Wills. How did that go?
It's really good, actually. One of the things I'm really enjoying about campaigning is actually talking to other candidates and seeing other candidates step up, because I know how much is involved, not just in time, but the emotional commitment that you have to give to turn up and actually give a speech in a public forum, particularly for those people where public speaking doesn't come naturally. So last night we had a climate forum, which was for all the candidates in Wills. Funnily enough, the Liberal candidate and the UAP candidate and Pauline Hanson's One Nation candidate didn't turn up.
What?
Kind of like not surprised by that, funnily enough. But Peter Khalil, the Labor incumbent, was there, and there were then myself and 3 other women candidates from the Socialist and Animal Justice Party. And it was actually, you know, like I said, I really like seeing that sort of opportunity to get to know people. We're all progressives in some way. So there are actually a lot of things that we can agree on. And I think I'm really passionate about women putting themselves forward. But, yeah, the climate forum itself, it was good. It was interesting. I think it's a good opportunity to really push Labor to go harder and faster on climate change. A lot of the rhetoric around this seat is that it's kind of still safe Labor, and I think we need to recognise that nothing is safe. I don't owe anybody my vote. Nobody else owes anybody their vote. And if we all voted with our values, we might actually end up with a much more diverse parliament, not just this two-party system that can ignore, you know, the views of the rest of the electorate that didn't vote number 1 Labor or number 1 Liberal. Yeah.
So I'm just basing this on Tim Reid, who is the Greens MP for the seat of Brunswick, the state seat of Brunswick, which is obviously in your neck of the woods, who was out there, who was tweeting out the climate forum. And he says that Labor's Peter Khalil lists the ALP climate policy, complete with the 2030 targets of 43% reduction to emissions, which, as we've discussed on Serious Danger, is dog shit in our personal opinion. That's the technical political term. But interesting here, like you it sounds like you mentioned donations from fossil fuel companies. Jefford says Greens don't take fossil fuel company donations and no party should. In response, Labor's Khalil says Greens took a donation from a high-rolling gambler. Was this when things were getting a little bit feisty? You going back and forth? Is that the classic Labor response to that stuff?
It was a very well managed forum, and the chair did very well to keep us all contained. But there was no right of reply for that sort of thing, even if I did have a reply. Right. I wasn't too sure who he was talking about. My understanding about any political donation to the Greens is that it's declared, it's transparent, it's actually vetted above a certain amount. So if he's talking about a particular donation that I was aware of, I can't remember the person's name, they made a donation, they don't have any sort of role in the Greens, they're not involved in party policy, they're not asking for a seat at the table, and they haven't been given a seat at the table. I don't know how much it was. I don't know that it's $500,000. But if that is true, like I said, we declare our donations. If I wanted to donate $100,000 to the Greens, if I had that sort of money, I would expect to be vetted and it would be discussed at party level. And I wouldn't be then granted, gold star membership to come and tell people how to dictate their policies. That's a really clear, transparent part of the Greens, and one reason why I align with the Greens, because it's not this sort of paying $1,000 for a seat at the table. It's paying $1,000 because you support the policies and the campaign, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously trotted out. It's regularly trotted out. Graham Wood is this guy who gave the biggest ever personal donation to a political party of this $1.6 million donation to the Greens in 2010. I mean, the Greens still do take political donations from various individuals. They don't take them from corporations. But the point is kind of moot. I mean, it's like, if you think that's a problem, if you think that it's bad that the Greens took this donation from a certain individual, and you think that no political party should do that, then you should have a policy that reflects that. And if you think it's bad that the Greens accepted this donation, it's obviously way worse when Labor Party takes literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, totaling up to billions of dollars over the course of the past couple of decades, or hundreds of millions of dollars, I should say. That's obviously bad. So that's a false equivalence to sort of compare the two, and you should change your policy accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah. And as you say, the level of influence that those individuals have on Greens policy is extremely, is very different. I don't know what kind of multimillionaire who donates to the Greens party thinks that they have an influence on affecting Greens policy to make them more amenable to millionaires and billionaires, but they're going to be sorely disappointed.
That's right. Yeah.
As opposed to the example which we can point to, which is you take fossil fuel company donations and surprise, surprise, you don't have serious climate policies that will do something about the climate crisis because you're beholden to those massive donors.
Yep, and that they get subsidies, the fossil fuel companies are then subsidised. Could that be because they've also been making donations? It's in their interest to make donations because they get subsidies at the other end.
Sweet return. Well, then what did Peter Khalil say about this? He says that no taxpayers' monies will be spent on subsidies. Likewise, all candidates commit to ending fossil fuel subsidies, but Labor's Peter Khalil says no taxpayers' money will be spent on subsidies. Does he include diesel tax rebates in that? So I don't know. Is it Labor's policy to end all subsidies to the fossil fuel industry?
I would say that is not something that he said last night, no. I was perhaps too busy sort of managing my own responses rather than trying to pick him up on his, but that is not something that he said. All the other candidates are very clear, and I was very clear that we would end fossil fuel and big corporation donations to political parties. I don't think he made that commitment at all.
Right, okay. Wonderful stuff. And then the other thing about Peter Khalil, so he's from the Labor right, which Bob Hawke was from, is the right wing of the Labor Party generally. The also weird thing that the people on Twitter who are particularly engaged in, say, conversations around Jobseeker and poverty activism in Australia may know that Peter Khalil sort of gets into it a little bit on Twitter with people, particularly anti-poverty activists, who are saying, hey, why doesn't Labor commit to raising Jobseeker to above the poverty line? And he went back and forth a fair bit with Avery Howard, another Greens candidate, some other folks on Twitter, and sort of saying, I've been arguing for an increase based on the calculations close to ACOS and per capita studies. I'm open to more. And then more and more tweets. And eventually said, you will have to wait and see. Hope you are pleasantly surprised. Sort of saying, hey, wait, just hang in there and wait for Labor's big announcement on what we're going to do about the rate of Jobseeker, which is currently below the poverty line.
Yeah.
Well, of course, this tweet came back to bite him on the ass quite considerably when Labor announces that they have absolutely no commitment to either do a review into the rate of Jobseeker or raise it at all. They'll think about it maybe at budget time, but they're not particularly fussed about raising Jobseeker to $88 a day to lift those people out of poverty. And he, I guess people, it's just Twitter, so who the hell cares? But is that your experience? He's just putting that vague suggestions of being more progressive out there, and then it doesn't actually amount to anything?
Yeah, unfortunately, I do hear that we might hear something in Sydney Road, but it'll be different when you get to Canberra because you've got to vote with your party. And I think people are upset about that. I also think it's not just Peter, but it's the ALP stuff. And I know you've talked about this before on the podcast about the sort of vote for us because we'll do better once we're in. Like our policy looks bad now, but it's okay because when we get in, we'll do something different. It's like, no, just be authentic. We'll vote for you if your policies are good. It's also that same line around voting Labor because they can form government and the Greens can't. It's like, I don't owe you my vote. I'll vote for you if you've got good policy or the candidate is a good person. But this idea that I should vote for you because you could win government isn't actually a reason to vote for you at all. I should be voting for the Greens or other independents that align with my values because we actually want more people in Parliament that are not Labor and Liberal because it turns out that you don't do the right thing by us anyway. So, I think it's a bit patronising to say this sort of just vote for us and you'll be pleasantly surprised. No, just tell us what you're going to do and we'll vote for you if we agree with it. It's bullshit.
It's like a fucking magic trick. Like just get invested and then who knows what could happen down the track.
It's also, I think I just don't like that sort of politics. Just be real, be authentic. Don't muck around, don't muck us around. Just, say what you're going to do. Don't say one thing down in Brunswick and do another thing when you get to Parliament.
Having said that, I mean, he did have this pretty massive swing to him at the last election, which some read as, I have no idea. He used to be my local member. I used to live in Wills way back in the day. I have no idea. Maybe he's a very diligent local member. I'm sure he's a nice enough guy doing some good stuff, et cetera, et cetera. Are you still finding it hard sometimes to pierce through a very strong Labor seat mindset with voters that you're talking to?
Yeah, I think we've got a long game happening. We had really good, strong primary vote in 2016, and people may not remember that was actually the year that Peter came in. So he wasn't the incumbent. It was the Calvin Thompson was retiring. So there was a good reason why we picked up a lot of votes, and we ran a really strong campaign. We had Samantha Ratnam as our candidate, who is now the leader of the Victorian Greens in State Parliament, and she's amazing. And then in 2019, we had Adam Pulford, who is an amazing candidate and has a really great profile, and he's now one of our city councillors. But I think perhaps there may have been a number of factors in 2019, but one of them at least was people that want to kick out the Liberal Party will vote for the Labor Party, and they worry that voting for the Greens might risk the Labor Party member or risk kicking out the Liberals. And we do hear a bit of that. People will say to me, we're not sure about voting Green because, we really want to kick out the Liberals. And I guess the message really in response is that you can actually put the Greens number one. We want to kick out the Liberals. I don't want a Liberal government. I'm not going to work with the Liberal government. But if we look at, say, what's been happening in the lower house with Adam Band, is that he's all alone in there, but he's doing so much work. And if we had a few other Greens in the lower house with him, we together could actually do a whole lot more work. And we would be pushing the Labor Party, if they're in government, to do better and to go harder and faster on climate change. So, we are going to kick out the Liberals from this seat anyway. The Liberal Party doesn't really get a look in. It's the two-party preferred is Greens and Labor. So you could, vote number one Green and you're not going to end up with a Liberal Party candidate here. That's just the way it is.
Paradise.
Yes.
A place where there's no chance of a Liberal candidate. See, perfect part of the world. I live in the West now. I live in Fraser in Footscray, but I do have very fond memories of good old Brunswick, North Fitzroy days. final thing to ask you for, and I don't want to minimize this as an issue or run out of time for it, but I know it's important. We haven't spent enough time on the podcast, but particularly issues around women's justice, gender justice, women's safety and gender justice. I mean, these are being put front and center by a lot of the independent candidates. It's also part of, obviously, the Greens policy platform. I know it's something that's important to you. I'm just interested how you're campaigning around that when you do get the chance to talk about those issues and the policy positions that really inspire you and animate you on this front. Like, you know, the patriarchy and the way that women are treated out in society seems like such a massive structural issue. It's sometimes hard to sort of draw the dots as to what a government or what politicians can do to make that better. What are you really campaigning on? What are you really passionate about when you're talking about those kind of issues?
So I've thought about going into politics for a long time, probably as long as I've lived in Melbourne, really. And one of the things probably the main thing that really worried me was how I might be treated in politics by the media and on social media. I used to watch how Julia Gillard was treated, and I thought, why would you ever put yourself forward? She's, her and Sarah Hanson-Young, Lydia Thorpe, any woman in politics really has to cope with that sort of online trolling and abuse. And then, Julia Gillard had people talking about what she was wearing on her second day as the Prime Minister. I just thought, why bother? And then I did the Pathways to Politics program for women at Melbourne Uni, and I realised I actually do have a lot of the skills I needed. I just needed the confidence. I just needed the kick up the bum to say, you can do this, Sarah, and you can hold your own. And I have done scarier things. Like, I gave birth to a baby and gave it away. Like, nothing can touch me. Come at me. Like, I am pretty resilient. Come at me. You can tell me that you think I've got a fat ass. I don't give a shit. This is more important than that. And I'm stronger than that. I don't care. So in some ways it was kind of building up that confidence. And also just, I think, doing things like watching what happened with Brittany Higgins and how she was treated. And I read the Jenkins review and I just went, you know what, we can do so much better than this. And the only way to make it better is to put myself forward as one of those people that can represent people in Parliament. And I'm raising two boys, and I've spent a lot of time thinking, well, they don't actually need me to, be a role model for them. They could go into politics themselves, probably. One of my kids, Raf, he's a bit older now, but when he was 4, he said, I'm going to be the government when I grow up. And I was like, you bloody well will be, and I'm not going to let you get there before I try, at least. You little rat. Middle-class white boy, of course he would. He wouldn't even need to try, just be Prime Minister next week. So I thought, stuff it. I'm just going to give this a go. And it turns out I do have the skills. It's a lot of fun. It's more fun than I thought it would be. It's a lot less scary than I thought it would be. So I guess my message would be for other women and non-binary folk that if you're interested, then absolutely just back yourself. The only person that ever doubted me was me. That's it. And I think we can have a real cultural change, but it has to be because there's more diversity in Parliament. It's not just women, it's everybody. That you get more diversity across all levels of government, and we're going to see more, a safe workplace for people working there, and for people feeling like they can actually put themselves forward and have a voice because they can see other people, including me, doing it as well. Yeah.
Rock on. Well said. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah. If people live in the seat of Wells, totally get involved. You go to sarahjefford.com. Well, that's your personal website. We'll put your candidate page as well in the... if you want to find out about surrogacy law, then go to sarahjefford.com. We'll put your candidate page in the show notes too. You're at Sarah_Jefford_ on Twitter.
I don't like Twitter. Can I just say I'm not a big fan of Twitter.
Okay.
I'm there, and you can find me. Come and tweet at me, but I might just run away if you tweet nasty things at me because I don't know how to handle it.
No, people who listen to this show will only tweet lovely things.
That's
solidarity.
True. I'll wait for those ones. Yeah.
Good luck, Sarah. The race for 4 Wills is on. Thinking of you and sending a lot of solidarity. Thanks for talking to us on Serious Danger.
Thanks, Tom.
Serious Danger Australia.
Oh, that was a dream. Thanks, Sarah.
You sure? I think I just waffled.
That's all podcasting is. We're all waffling all the time.
That's true.